Do you even have a soul? Or did you sell that along with your humanity to buy another skyscraper? Veronica Zeller fired as she stood in the middle of the glass-walled boardroom, her voice echoing through the silence like a slap. Zane Jennings blinked once. Slowly. The man didn't flinch, of course he didn't. He was the kind of millionaire who wore tailored black suits like armor and stared at people like they were numbers on a spreadsheet. Cold. Mechanical. Empty. She hated that. I'm sorry, Zane said, his voice smooth and maddeningly even. Are you finished? Veronica crossed her arms, her chest rising and falling with frustration. She was supposed to be here as a representative for the nonprofit her late father founded, trying to negotiate a deal with Jennings Development to preserve a historic community center. Instead, she was fighting with a man who had the emotional range of a brick wall. I'm finished when you stop trying to bulldoze history just to slap your name on another luxury condo. Zane stood from his chair. He was tall, too tall, and when he moved, it was like the room shifted around him. He walked toward her with calm confidence, stopping just a few feet away. I'm not interested in your dramatics. I'm interested in logistics. You want that building saved? Then give me something worth more than the land it sits on. Like what? My soul, she snapped. Zane's lips twitched, but not into a smile. It was something else, something unreadable. Whatever it was, it made Veronica's skin prickle. Your time, he said simply. Work for me. Full time. 3 months. You want to save that building? Prove it. Come into my world. Show me why it matters. Veronica laughed. You're kidding. I don't joke, he replied. Of course he didn't. He didn't even smile. She stared at him, trying to figure out what game he was playing. But there was nothing in his expression. Just that same unreadable stillness. 3 months, she repeated, narrowing her eyes. And then you'll save the center? If you can convince me it's worth more than the profit I'd make tearing it down. She hated him. She hated everything about the way he stood there like he owned the city because, well, he practically did. But she loved that building. It was where her father had taught art classes to kids who couldn't afford them. It was where she learned to paint, where she learned to believe in something bigger than herself. So she said the most ridiculous things she'd ever said in her life. Fine. I'll do it. Zane nodded once. Start Monday. Monday came too fast. And Zane Jennings didn't make it easy. He didn't greet her when she walked into his office. Just handed her a folder from behind his obsidian desk and said, read fast. You'll need it for the client call in 15 minutes. That set the tone. Zane was impossible. He worked like a machine, never smiled, never joked, never stopped. And he expected her to keep up. Veronica didn't back down easily, but by the end of the first week, she was exhausted and completely baffled. Because, as much as she hated to admit it, he was brilliant. He could dissect a multi-million-dollar deal in seconds. He made decisions with laser precision. But he didn't just do it for power, he did it because somewhere beneath all that ice, he cared about doing things right. He never cut corners. Never broke promises. And he listened to her, really listened even when they argued. Which was often. You don't get to play savior just because you throw money at problems, Veronica said one night as they worked late over takeout in his office. Zane leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie slightly. And you don't get to pretend you know me just because you've seen me sign a check. Veronica rolled her eyes. I know enough. You're cold. You're calculated. You don't do anything unless it benefits you. For a second, something flickered across his face. But it was gone before she could name it. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. But maybe you're not even trying to see anything else. By the third week, things started to shift. Zane began asking about her father, about the community center, about her art, and Veronica started noticing things she hadn't before, like how he never interrupted her when she spoke, even in meetings, how he always made sure she had lunch, even if he didn't eat, how he stayed late after she left, staring out the window like he was carrying something too heavy to name. And one night, she saw something she never expected. They were at a charity gala, one of those over-the-top fundraisers with chandeliers the size of cars and menus in French. Zane had shown up in a tailored navy tux and handed her a dress she swore cost more than her rent. "You'll need something appropriate," he said when she opened the box.
"I have clothes," she'd snapped.
Not ones that matched the theme of a $5,000 a plate dinner. She wore the dress. She hated how good it looked. She hated how he looked at her like she was something rare and delicate. And she especially hated how he didn't leave her side all night, introducing her to CEOs and investors like she belonged there. But it was later, after the speeches, when the music softened and the crowd thinned, that everything changed. They stood on the terrace, the city lights glowing behind them. Veronica turned to say something sarcastic, probably, but stopped. Zane was staring at the skyline, jaw clenched, eyes distant. "My dad used to take me up to rooftops when I was a kid," he said suddenly, his voice low. "He said the city looked cleaner from up here. Like it was pretending to be something it wasn't." She frowned. "I thought you didn't talk about your family." "I don't," he said. "But you asked what made me like this." He looked at her then, not like a man who wanted to win an argument, but like someone who was tired of pretending he didn't care. "I was 12 when I watched him walk away from everything.
My mom.
Our home.
Me."
He said I was too much like him.
Too cold.
Too driven." Her breath caught. "I promised myself I'd never be weak enough to care about people who'd leave anyway." Veronica stepped closer, heart pounding. "And yet here you are," she whispered, "fighting to save a community center for kids you'll never meet." He laughed, but it sounded broken. When he looked at her again, there were tears in his eyes.
"Actual tears."
And in that moment, something inside her cracked. Because for the first time, she saw him not the suit, not the money, not the control.
She saw the man.
And he wasn't soulless. He was just scared to lose anything that mattered. Veronica reached up, brushing her fingers gently along his jaw. "You're not cold, Zane." He didn't move. "You're just human." And then, without thinking, without planning, she kissed him. And he kissed her back like he hadn't breathed in years. Zane didn't speak as they drove back from the gala. The silence wasn't tense this time, it was thick with something else. Something unspoken and electric. Veronica sat beside him in the back of the sleek black town car, her fingers folded in her lap, her face turned toward the window. The city blurred past in streaks of gold and steel, and every so often, she caught Zane's reflection in the glass. His gaze never left her. He didn't touch her. He didn't say a word, but the air between them buzzed like a live current. When the car finally pulled up in front of her apartment building, she hesitated. "I don't know what that was," she said softly, her hand on the door handle, but not moving. Zane's voice was low. "Neither do I." She turned to him. "It wasn't part of the deal." "No," he said, his eyes steady on hers. "It wasn't." She opened the door and stepped out into the night air without looking back. The next morning, she arrived early. Earlier than him, which surprised the receptionist enough to raise an eyebrow but say nothing. Veronica sat in the corner of his office without turning the lights on, her thoughts tangled like wires. When Zane walked in 20 minutes later, he paused in the doorway, then closed the door behind him and didn't ask why she was there. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I didn't either."
She didn't ask why.
She already knew. Zane set his briefcase down and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her. "You asked why I care about that building. I think I finally figured it out." Veronica stood, slowly.
"Why?"
"Because it matters to you." She waited, but he didn't turn. "That's not a good enough reason to change your mind," she said. Zane glanced over his shoulder. "Isn't it?" She crossed the room until she was beside him. "What are you afraid of?"
His jaw tightened.
That if I let myself care about something that isn't measurable, I'll forget how to protect what I've built. You think caring weakens you? I know it does. She looked out at the skyline with him. Then you've never seen what it does to someone who has nothing left except the things they care about. When he finally turned, his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. I don't want to become someone who can't walk away. Then stop walking. Zane's hand reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I don't know how to do this. You don't have to.
Just.
Don't lie to yourself. He leaned in, his voice barely audible. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect you either. They didn't kiss. Not this time. But the moment wrapped around them like a thread, pulling tighter, drawing them closer. The next few days shifted everything. Zane began including her in more than just the center's negotiations. She sat in on internal development meetings, analyzed proposals, and found herself speaking up even when no one asked her to. And Zane listened. Not because he was humoring her, but because he actually wanted her opinion. Why are your people so afraid to challenge you? She asked after one particularly dry meeting in which not a single person dared contradict him. He didn't look up from the blueprint on his desk. Because I don't reward hesitation. You also don't reward honesty if it doesn't match what you already believe. Zane raised his eyes, sharp. Are you accusing me of surrounding myself with cowards? I'm saying people follow your lead. If you want them to challenge you, you have to show them you won't punish them for it. His mouth twitched. So you're suggesting I reward dissent? I'm suggesting you stop treating this company like a military campaign. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. And what do you think it is? A chance to build something that lasts. Not just towers. Something that actually matters. Zane's gaze lingered on her for a long beat. You sound like your father. Veronica didn't flinch. He believed in impact over legacy. Legacy is impact, Zane said. No, she replied. Legacy is what people say about you when you're gone. Impact is what they feel while you're still here. He was quiet after that. That evening, he invited her to accompany him to a private art auction. She hesitated, but curiosity won. The venue was a restored theater in Tribeca, all velvet drapes and golden arches. Veronica wore a simple navy dress from her own closet this time. She caught Zane watching her from across the room more than once, but he didn't approach until after the final piece had been sold. You didn't bid, she said as they stood near the exit, her champagne untouched. I wasn't here to buy. Then why come? He looked at the stage. My mother used to paint. Veronica blinked. You never mentioned her before. He didn't look at her. She died when I was 20. Cancer. I was in London when she called to say it had spread. By the time I got back, she was gone. For a moment, neither of them moved. She used to bring me to places like this, he continued. Even when we couldn't afford it. Said beauty was a necessity, not a luxury. Veronica swallowed. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you. Zane turned to her. She always said I'd end up with someone who'd never be impressed by anything I owned. Someone who'd force me to feel more than I wanted to. Veronica's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you saying that's me? I'm saying I haven't felt this unguarded in years. And I don't know how to handle it. She reached for his hand. Then don't handle it. Just feel it. He looked down at their hands, then back at her. If I let go of the control, I don't know who I'll be. She stepped closer. Maybe someone better. The drive back was quiet again, but different. Comfortable. When they arrived at his building, she expected him to say goodnight. He didn't. Instead, he opened the car door for her and said, Come upstairs. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she did. Too much. Still, she followed. His penthouse unfolded like something out of a magazine. Glass walls, dark marble, minimalist furniture that somehow managed to feel intimate. But none of that held her attention. Only him. He poured 2 glasses of wine, but didn't hand hers over. Just held it, watching her. You know, she said, walking slowly toward him. When I first met you, I thought you were incapable of feeling anything. And now, I think you feel everything. You just don't let it show. He handed her the glass. You see too much. Maybe you hide too much. They stood there, inches apart, the only light coming from the city outside. Zane set his glass down. If I asked you to stay, would you think it's because I'm trying to win? She shook her head.
No.
I'd think it's because you're tired of pretending you don't want to lose. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers along the side of her neck. I've never met anyone like you. Veronica leaned in, her breath warm against his cheek. Then stop trying to figure me out. And just be with me. This time, when they kissed, it wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, certain, and neither of them looked away. Veronica didn't recognize the man who walked into the office the next morning. Zane wore the same tailored suit and carried the same sleek leather portfolio, but something was different. He didn't bark instructions or retreat behind spreadsheets. He walked past her desk, stopped, and looked at her. Really looked. You have a minute? He asked. She stood, surprised. Sure. Instead of heading to his office, he led her to the rooftop terrace 2 floors up a space she'd only seen once when she'd gotten lost searching for the finance department. The city stretched wide and endless beneath them, and the air was crisp with the early bite of spring. There's something I want to show you, he said, pulling a folded document from his jacket. I spent most of last night rewriting the center's proposal. Veronica's eyes widened as she took the pages. You did this yourself? I had to see if there was a version where both of us win. As she scanned the lines, her breath caught. He'd integrated her suggestions, but more than that, he'd included ideas she'd only ever mentioned in passing. A youth arts program, a rotating grant for local artists, a preservation clause that prevented future redevelopment for at least 20 years. You listened, she said softly. I heard you, he corrected. For the first time, she didn't have a single rebuttal. I want to be clear with you about something, he added. I didn't do this to impress you. Or to prove anything.
He paused.
I did it because I realized I was wrong. About everything. Veronica folded the papers, her fingers tightening around them. You were never wrong about numbers, Zane. But people aren't equations. I know that now. She turned to him, the wind tugging at a loose strand of her hair. You're changing, and I don't think it's because of me. Not entirely. It's because of us, he said. You forced me to look at what I'd become. And for the first time, I didn't like what I saw. Veronica didn't reply. She didn't have to. Later that day, they met with the city board for the final vote on the building. Zane presented the revised proposal himself, with Veronica seated beside him not as a consultant, but as a partner. As he spoke, she watched the way the board members leaned in, surprised by the shift in tone, the unexpected generosity of the new terms. By the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. The center was saved. When they stepped outside into the sunlight, Zane didn't reach for her hand. He simply looked at her like the wind belonged to her alone. You did it, she said, the wind brushing her cheek. No, he replied. We did.
She didn't kiss him then. She didn't need to.
That night, he invited her to dinner not at one of his usual sleek rooftop spots, but somewhere different. A bistro tucked between 2 bookstores on a cobbled street in the West Village. It was warm and dimly lit, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and candles in old wine bottles. I used to come here when I was still in school, he said as they sat across from each other at a small corner table. Back when I couldn't afford the entrees and just ordered bread and coffee. She smiled. Let me guess. You wore a suit even then. I wore whatever was clean. But I sat here and watched the people who could afford the wine list and told myself one day I'd be one of them. And now you own 3 vineyards, she teased. 4, he corrected. But who's counting? She laughed then, the sound echoing between the brick walls. It wasn't the first time he'd heard her laugh, but it was the first time it didn't sound like armor. As they ate, he asked about her childhood, her favorite teacher, the first painting she ever sold, the time she'd snuck onto a train to the coast just to sketch the ocean before sunrise. "You're not what I expected," he said, sipping his wine. She tilted her head. "What did you expect? Someone who'd flinch at the first sign of pressure. Someone who'd give up when it got hard. And instead you got someone who called you soulless in front of 12 executives." He raised his glass. "To honesty." She clinked hers against his. "To change." After dinner, they walked. No driver, no car. Just the two of them weaving through quiet streets lit by golden lamps. When they reached his building, she stopped. "I should go." He looked down at her, eyes unreadable. "Do you want to?" "No." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then don't." Inside the penthouse, the windows were dark, the city a quiet hum below. This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't urgent, it was tender, deliberate, reverent. They made love slowly, like they had all the time in the world. And for the first time in her life, Veronica didn't feel like she was fighting for space in someone else's story. She felt like she'd finally found her place. The next morning, she woke to find Zane sitting at the kitchen island, barefoot, shirtless, and reading a handwritten letter. She moved to stand behind him, arms circling his shoulders. "What is it?" He handed it to her without speaking. It was from his mother, dated 2 weeks before she died. She read it in silence, her chest tightening with each line. It was filled with hope,
Regret. Love.
and one final wish that her son would one day find someone who made him feel more than he thought he could bear. Veronica folded the letter carefully and set it down. "She saw you," she said softly, "even when you couldn't see yourself." Zane reached up, pulling her into his lap. His hold was firm, grounding. "I thought I had to build walls to protect myself," he said. "But all I was doing was keeping everything good out." She brushed her lips along his temple. "I'm not here to tear them down. Just to remind you there's life beyond them." He pulled her tighter. "I want that life. With you. Then take it." And for once, Zane Jennings didn't calculate, didn't hesitate, didn't wait for the perfect opening. He just kissed her like he already had everything he'd ever wanted. The sound of distant piano chords drifted through the penthouse as Veronica stepped barefoot onto the marble floor, following the music to its source. Her pulse quickened not because she'd never heard Zane play, but because she hadn't known he could. He sat at the grand piano in the corner of the living space, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, fingers moving with unexpected sensitivity over the keys. His profile was softer in the morning light, the edges of his expression unguarded, vulnerable. When he noticed her, he didn't stop. "I didn't know this was part of your repertoire," she said gently, approaching the piano. "I stopped after she died," he replied without looking up. "Didn't think I'd ever want to hear the sound again." Veronica leaned against the side of the piano, folding her arms. "But you played it just now. Because last night changed something in me. I didn't know how much I missed feeling safe enough to just exist." Her gaze didn't waver. "You don't need to earn rest, Zane. I thought I did. I thought I had to outrun the silence. But this morning, I realized I wanted to fill it instead." He played the last few notes, then let them fade into the stillness. When he turned to her, his eyes were clear. No shadows, no defenses, just the man she had peeled back layer by layer. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. "With us. With the center. With everything." Veronica tilted her head. "And I want to fund a permanent foundation. In your father's name. Something that supports community arts spaces across the city long term. Not a tax write-off. Not a press stunt. A real legacy." She blinked. "Zane, I already spoke to legal. I want you to run it. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You trust me with that? I trust you with everything I've been too afraid to give anyone. He stood, walking around the piano until they were face to face. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect you. But the way you walked into my life and demanded I show up fully, honestly, I've never had that kind of mirror held to me before. Veronica reached up, tracing the edge of his collar. I didn't come into your world to change you, you know. I know, he said, but you made me want to change for myself. Later that day, he took her to see the construction site. The community center was already in the early stages of restoration. The old brickwork had been power washed, the wooden window frames reinforced. Scaffolding lined the edges, but the building's spirit remained intact. I've had every contractor sign a clause, Zane said, stepping over a beam.
No shortcuts. No substitutions.
This isn't just about aesthetics, it's about meaning. Veronica knelt beside a stack of sketches pinned to a makeshift drafting table. These are yours. I wanted to honor the original design. Your father's layout. His notes. You found those. In the archive boxes you left in my office. I went through every one. She ran her fingers over the faded pencil lines. You didn't just listen. You remembered. I always remember what matters. She stood and faced him. You're not the man I met that day in the boardroom. Maybe I am, he said. But now I'm finally willing to let someone see all of it. That evening, they hosted a private gala in the very heart of the city, the first event funded by the new foundation. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about purpose. The guest list included artists, educators, local leaders. Veronica wore a simple black gown, elegant and understated, as she moved through the rooftop garden where the event was held. Zane stayed close, not clinging, just anchored, present in a way he never had been before. You're good at this, she said as they watched a group of students present their first mural design for the center. I had a good teacher, he replied, his hand brushing hers. The night closed with a short speech, and it was Zane who stepped onto the platform. I've spent years building things that scrape the clouds, he said, his voice steady. But I never realized how empty that height can feel until I met someone who taught me the value of depth. This foundation isn't about me. It's about the people who show up day after day to make sure art, community, and hope remain within reach. He looked at Veronica as he spoke the final words. Some people walk into your life and challenge everything you thought you knew. If you're lucky, they stay. If you're even luckier, you become someone worth staying for. The applause was thunderous, but Veronica didn't hear it. Her eyes locked with his, and in them, she saw the truth she'd sensed that night on the terrace, the tears, the vulnerability, the man behind the empire. When the crowd dispersed, he found her standing near the edge of the garden, city lights glittering below. Come with me, he said. He didn't wait for an answer. Just took her hand and led her to the rooftop's farthest point, where a small table was set with 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne. What is this? She asked, brow lifted. Something overdue. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Veronica froze. Zane. He opened it, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond framed by delicate silver filigree. I don't believe in fate, he said. But I believe in the moment I saw you standing in that boardroom, defiant and furious and alive. I believe in how you challenged me, how you saw past what I showed the world. I believe in every version of myself I've been since the moment you walked into my life. He knelt. I want to spend the rest of my life becoming the man you already see when you look at me. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. Yes, she whispered. Of course I will. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her soft and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't need an audience to be extraordinary. Behind them, the city hummed. The garden lights flickered. And in that moment, neither of them was pretending. Neither of them was guarded. They were simply two people who had stripped each other down to the truth and found love waiting there. Zane rested his forehead against hers, his voice a breath between them. "I used to think I had no soul," he said. "But then you walked in and proved I had one all along." Veronica smiled through her tears. "You just needed someone to see it." And she always had. The wedding was not a spectacle. There were no flashing lights, no celebrity guest list, no press coverage. Zane had suggested something grand once, an estate in Tuscany, a private island off the coast of Greece, but Veronica had only looked at him from across their shared bed and said, "I want it to feel real." So they chose the garden behind the newly restored community center. The same place her father had once planted a small row of cherry trees, one of which had miraculously survived decades of neglect. It stood tall now, blooming with delicate white flowers, a quiet witness to everything that had been lost and rebuilt. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Veronica asked as she adjusted the soft ivory wrap around her shoulders, watching the final touches being made to the floral arch. Zane glanced at her, his tie still undone, his cufflinks forgotten on the bench beside him. "I think he'd be furious. I didn't ask permission first."
But yes.
Proud. She reached over and laced their fingers together. "You didn't ask because you didn't know you'd fall in love with me." "I didn't ask," he said, "because I didn't know how to admit I needed someone." Their vows were spoken under that blossom-heavy tree, surrounded by only a handful of people. Zane's mother's best friend sat in the front row with misty eyes and a photograph in her lap. Veronica's former art students, now taller, older, but still wide-eyed with wonder, lined the aisle, each holding a single white lily. No one wore tuxedos. No one walked stiffly. It wasn't a performance. It was a promise. When Zane said her name, his voice cracked. Not from nerves, but from reverence. "I once believed control was the only way to survive," he began, "but then I met you, and I realized control means nothing when it costs you joy. You gave me the courage to let go, to feel, to want. And I will spend every day of this life protecting the person who gave me mine back." Veronica didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because she wanted to remember every detail, without the blur of tears. "I didn't believe you were real at first," she said. "You were everything I'd told myself to avoid, sharp, untouchable, closed off. But behind all that, you were just waiting for someone to see you. And I did. I will always see you. And I will never look away." They sealed it with a kiss so soft it felt like a whisper, and the crowd stood in quiet celebration, not clapping, not cheering, just holding the moment like something sacred. Afterward, they danced alone beneath strings of vintage bulbs draped between trees. There was no band, just a record player spinning a crackling old jazz tune Zane had found in a shop 2 weeks earlier. "You're not looking at anyone else," she teased as they swayed slowly. "I can't," he replied. "I'm still trying to believe you're mine. You married me. I still don't believe I deserve you." She leaned closer, resting her cheek against his. "Then I guess we'll just have to keep proving it to each other." As the guests filtered out, one by one, leaving petals and laughter in their wake, Zane pulled her aside. "There's something I want to show you before we leave." They walked hand in hand to the back of the property, where a small brick addition had been built. It was unassuming, with a wooden door and a bronze plaque beside it. Veronica paused. "What's this?" He unlocked the door and stepped back to let her in. The space was filled with light. Skylights overhead cast golden beams across the polished concrete floor. Along the left wall stood a series of easels, each one new, each one ready. On the right, a row of lockers with nameplates. In the center, a small desk with her father's name carved into the front, preserved from the original building. "I had it rebuilt," Zane said, "to the exact specifications from your father's old plans. This is where the art program starts. Right here." Veronica didn't speak. Her throat closed too tightly. She took one trembling step forward and pressed her fingers against the old desk, feeling the grooves of her father's initials. "He would have loved this," she whispered. "I didn't do it for him," Zane said softly. "I did it for you." She turned and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Zane held her tightly. "You gave me a family, Veronica. I'll never stop giving it back to you." They didn't leave for a honeymoon, not right away. Instead, they stayed in the city, in the penthouse that now felt like home. Zane no longer worked through every weekend. He painted with her instead, badly, messily, joyfully. Veronica ran the foundation with a small, hand-picked staff, carefully curating programs that reached beyond expectations and into neighborhoods often left behind. They built something that didn't just last. It mattered. On the first anniversary of the center's reopening, they threw a street fair in the courtyard. Children painted murals on temporary walls. Musicians played from makeshift stages. Zane helped set up tents with rolled sleeves and a hammer, and no one recognized him as the man who once closed deals with a single phone call. That evening, after the last balloon had floated skyward and the lights had dimmed, Veronica sat on the rooftop of the center with a sketch pad in her lap. Zane joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "What are you drawing?" he asked, settling beside her. "You," she said, not looking up. "Again? This time I think I finally got your eyes right." He leaned over her shoulder. "You always get them right." They sat in silence as the stars blinked on above them, the city humming softly below. "I used to think I'd never feel at peace," Zane said, brushing a hand over her hair. "That I was too broken, too far gone." "You were never broken," she replied. "You were just waiting for someone to trust with the pieces." He pulled her close. "And you were waiting for someone to believe your fire wasn't too much." She smiled against his chest. "We both found what we didn't know we needed." Years passed. The center expanded another wing, a second location. The foundation grew stronger, but never lost its soul. Veronica continued to paint, her work now featured in galleries that once overlooked her. Zane never returned to who he was before. He didn't want to. He sat on panels, yes, and advised on high-level projects, but he always came home in time for dinner. Always remembered to kiss her goodnight. One spring morning, as soft light poured through their bedroom window, Veronica stirred to find him watching her. "You're staring," she murmured.
"I'm memorizing."
She reached for his hand, now wrapped around hers without hesitation. "We're not going anywhere." He kissed her forehead. "I know, but I still wake up every day wondering how I got this lucky." Veronica looked into his eyes, the same ones that had once been shuttered and cold, now open, warm, and endlessly hers. "Because you finally let someone love you," she said. And he did. Every single day after that.